First of all, I would like to start. We left from Ravenna yesterday, and I know and I suppose that some of you had the opportunity of visiting the city and admiring the beautiful mosaics, but maybe also paying a visit to the small, unassuming chapel where the poet Dante Alighieri is buried, the poet par excellence in the Italian literature and the Italian culture, what we call il sommo poeta. And so I can assume that you touched his bones and that you know something about Dante. You know, obviously, his name. You probably know that he was born in Florence and buried in Ravenna. You know something about his major achievement, the poem entitled Divine Comedy. You know that Divine Comedy is a travel through a journey through the three realms of the Christian afterlife, Inferno, Purgatorio, and Paradiso. In my experience, I noticed also that so often Dante also is a sort of a mysterious figure, intimidating figure. Probably somebody read something of the Divine Comedy, limited himself or herself to the first section, the Inferno, which is more entertaining and more graphic for sure. And there is a sort of diffidence or sort of, this medieval poet, so much doctrine in this poem, so much theology, maybe even a little too much religion for our current taste. So I would like to start talking for a few minutes about an attempt that I have been I've been working on, together with my friend Ric Burns over there, to render, let's say, this figure and the Divine Comedy more accessible, without, making it banal, but trying to avoid the intimidating aura of, mysterious and academic subject. To bring Dante to a larger audience and especially emphasizing his message and his human message more than the philological implications of his text, etc. So we, with Ric, embarked a couple of years ago in a project that hope will be finished in a couple of years, in 21, which is a documentary film for PBS, destined to what? Destined to the world. And there is also behind this project a muse, an inspirator, who is my wife, Christine, who at a certain point started to insist, and their wives can be very insistent, that I would share what I knew about Dante, not only with my classes, not only with my students, not only with my colleagues, but with, let's say, the world, or at least with a large audience. And so then I met Ric. We fell in love immediately, and we have been working on this project, which has the ambition and took the challenge of trying to make Dante understandable and enjoyable for us and for the largest audience possible. And the largest audience possible, naturally, is a English-speaking audience. So I would like to start showing you a little. This is Dante, the unmistakable profile of the poet. And this is a little trailer of the work, the introductory to the work that we have been working on. And it's, our first attempt to give to our general audience the parameters, the idea of what Dante counts, or what Dante could be for us men and women of the 21st century. So let's see.
Nel mezzo del cammin di nostra vita mi ritrovai per una selva oscura. Midway upon the journey of our life, I found myself within a forest dark, for the straightforward pathway had been lost.
There is something in Dante's work that seems to strike a chord all over the planet.
The great gift of working on Dante has been that it has always been able to surprise me, so that I can read it over and over again and not feel that I am near exhausting it.
The range of things that interest him, the complexity of the way that he thinks about them and tries to tie them together, his relentless desire to reflect on what he's doing.
Who really was Dante? What's really driving him?
The beginning of his story should be in the middle of his life, because the beginning is not the day that you are born, but it's the day when you realize that this is the moment to make sense of what you have lived already if you want to live a significant life.
The title appears in Latin, Commedia of Dantis Alighieri. So there is Dante the character, Dante the narrator, but also Dante the author. This is a story that begins in hell and ends in heaven.
This is the journey from exile to homeland. This is the condition of humankind, exiled from God.
Here is Dante, the exile from Florence, describing the travails of his life. It's an act of huge arrogance and of huge ambition, but the verses of the cantos are so finely constructed that I think that's one of the things that's very difficult to replicate.
I would say that at a certain point the Divine Comedy might have kind of exploded in his mind.
The things he says about human life are very interesting, in fact. Death, the life, how to live a moral life, the death of your parents, the love for your children.
He's an author who comments on, writes about some of the most important questions of cosmology, philosophy, and theology that were in debate during his time.
The Divine Comedy and the contact with the Divine Comedy is a sort of initiation of a baptism of a literary culture, of a cultural baptism for every Italian. I think this is true.
What do you make of someone who can create something that is so ultimately open? Something that can be transformed into a video game or drawings by Botticelli.
He's a poet, in my opinion, that never wrote just for himself. He always implied others, or sometimes even simply the world.
Dante is a poet of the 14th century, and yet he seems to talk to us as if he is our contemporary. And I think that is part of the enduring legacy.
Okay, this was our trailer, and I hope that it was able to excite your curiosity at least, and I hope that you'll be among the viewers of the whole thing in a couple of years. But let's back to the basics. Let's go back to the basics now. A few dates and a few places. So now we know that Dante was buried in Ravenna and died in Ravenna in 1321, so the anniversary is nearing. And Dante was born in Florence in 1265, was deeply involved with the riotous political life of his city, a city that he defined la città partita, the city divided par excellence, the city divided by political strife between different family clans and different political parties. And Dante was a prominent political figure of the city. He was, and we could call him a Guelfo Bianco. The city was divided in two major parties, Guelfi Bianchi and Guelfi Neri, the blacks and the whites. What was the difference? Well, let's say that the whites, and Dante was among them, were those Florentines who were more jealous of the independence of their city as a libero comune, as a free city, and especially were suspicious of the political actions of the Pope. Also the emperor, but the emperor was far away, was in Germany. The Pope was much nearer to the city and more menacing in his theocratic views of the independence of the city of Florence. And Dante was among those who were, more cautious about and more aware of the menace that the Pope posed on Florentine freedom. The blacks, the Guelfi Neri, were more lenient towards the expansionism of the Pope, especially the Pope Boniface VIII, a formidable figure, very menacing figure, and the principal enemy of Dante himself. So Dante was involved in this political differences, and so when his party was defeated in 1302, he was defeated too. The Guelfi Neri took over in a town with the support of the Pope, and Dante was exiled. To be exact, he was out of town at the moment, and he knew that in the city a trial had been orchestrated against him. He had been accused of baratteria, which is, political corruption. He had been accused of pocketing money in exchange of political favors. It was a farce. It was a farce of a trial. It was just a way for the victorious Guelfi Neri to get rid of him as a political figure in Florence. And Dante never showed up in court. He didn't want to submit himself to this farce of a trial. So he was condemned. He was condemned to capital execution. He never went back to Florence. But we have also to emphasize one thing that it's not so commonly known, I think, that at a certain point he chose his exile. At a certain point, Florence offered to him to go back and to be pardoned, but he didn't want to be pardoned. You accept a pardon only if you accept that you were a criminal, if you committed some crime that you have to be pardoned about. And Dante instead, he wrote in that occasion a beautiful letter saying this is not the way Dante Alighieri will go back to his town. So he chose at a certain point the exile in order not to submit himself to the humiliation of admitting a crime that he hadn't committed. And he accepted exile, which meant poverty, meant solitude. His family remained back in Florence. meant to go from one city to another, from one court to another, from one lord to another, begging for a piece of bread and for a roof on his head. And he's very explicit in his writings about the humiliations of his exile. But during the exile, he prepared his own revenge. And what was that revenge? What was that vendetta? That revenge was exactly the poem, the Divine Comedy. A grandiose effort, a superhuman effort. At a certain point, Dante says in the poem that he had become macro, all skin and bones, in the effort of writing such a challenging piece of poetry. And but that was his way of taking revenge over his fellow citizens and all the others that had, condemned him. Look who I really am. This is the man that you exile. This is the poet that you exile. This is the intellectual that you excluded from the city of Florence. So let's start our journey through the Divine Comedy, through this grandiose poem, to this kind of personal vendetta, but not only that. But in fact, I think that without the exile, probably the Divine Comedy wouldn't have written, or wouldn't have been written in the same way. And it's going to be a journey divided into two, if you have the patience of listening to me until the very end. There will be a physical journey through the three realms of the afterlife, which constitute the body of the narration, of the narrative of this poem. And then there will be a journey which will be less graphic, will be more an moral and intellectual kind of journey. And we'll start with Inferno. Inferno, as you might know, is a funnel-like abyss which goes from the surface of the earth until the very center of the earth. This is the chart of hell by Sandro Botticelli, a famous one, made famous also by the infamous movie of Dan Brown. And you can tell here at the beginning on top, the green is the Silva Oscura, the forest dark, where the protagonist says that he found himself lost, and which signifies a moral crisis, the moral crisis which ignites, which triggers the narration. And then this is a cross-section of hell, naturally, and Dante goes in his journey, spirals down through the very detailed sins of humanity. It's a real mapping of all things that humanity can do wrong. And until the center of the earth. At the center of the earth, there are the worst sinners of them all, and naturally, Lucifer. The center of the earth is a frozen lake. It's a lake of ice. And there are not so many flames in Dante's hell. We associate the image of hell with the flames, with fire, but there are not so many flames in Dante's hell. And the worst sinners are instead immersed in a lake of ice. Why? Because the worst sinners are the traitors, and especially the traitors of their benefactors. And who are the benefactors? The benefactors are people who helped you, who loved you, who did you well, without having any particular obligation towards you. They were not your parents, they were not your fellow citizens. They were people who helped you and loved you gratuitously. And to this gratuitous love, you responded with betrayal and hatred. And this total absence of any human love, this heartless condition of the sinners, obviously is reflected in the cold. In the cold of that lake. The worst sin for Dante is the absence of love. Is the absence of humanity. And we have other images here. This is a map, very detailed, of all the sins. But this other one is a little, it's almost like, you know, ice cream cone sliced. And you see that we start with the limbo, where the pagan who pagans who couldn't know the message of the gospel are punished. They are not actually punished. They are there, and they only feel the nostalgia for something that they couldn't participate in. And then you have lust, and then you have gluttony, and then you have greed, and then you have anger, and then you have heresy, and then you have violence, and then you have fraud, but with a lot of subsections and more detailed cases of wrongs. And then at the circle 9th, you have treachery, as I said already. This is exactly the last section, the last part of hell, with this kind of precipice at the end. This is a beautiful image, I think, of the sinners at the end of this first section of the Divine Comedy. You see the frozen lake and the sinners who are immersed in the ice. And then, naturally, in the cold, Lucifer. Lucifer is the most monstrous of all sinners. It's almost like a gigantic machine at the center of the universe. It's funny to think that for Dante, at the center of the earth, which is at the center of the universe, at the center of the cosmos, there is this heart of darkness. There is this seed of evil around which all the cosmos rotates. But then Dante escapes. I mean, he exits. He leaves Inferno. This is a representation of the earth. This is the funnel-like abyss of Inferno. And then, according to Dante's detailed topography or geography, there is a tunnel underground which leads you to what? To the mountain of Purgatory. The mountain of Purgatory is, let's skip this Lucifer again. The mountain of Purgatory is let's say, the mold of Inferno. There are terraces around which the purging souls are punished for their sins, and it's a simplified place compared to Inferno. The sins of these people are not so particularly distinguished or detailed compared to Inferno. The thing that we have to always remember is that Dante almost invented purgatory, because purgatory, even theologically and also from the topographic point of view, was a kind of a blurred, indecisive reality before Dante. Only in 1254, the Pope Innocenzo IV had issued a brief saying that yes, the purgatory exists, is a place where people, you know, are purging their souls from the wrongs, for the sins that they committed during their lives. But the church was not clear about the nature of purgatory, and especially about where the purgatory was and how it was supposed to work. In general, it was considered sort of weighted chamber of Inferno, a vague underground dark place. And Dante instead subverts this traditional imagination. For him, instead, purgatory is a mountain. Purgatory is en plein air. Purgatory is in the middle of the ocean, surrounded by air, by the winds, by the invested by the light of the sun, and just the idea of the elevation. The souls have to go around and ascend the mountains, purifying themselves. That gives you the idea of a purgatory, which is more a place of hope and spiritual elevation, not just a place only of dark sacrifice. And then we have the hierarchy, the classification of the human sins in purgatory. As I said, they are the same that we found in Inferno, but simplifies. And we go from the proud, envious, wrathful, slothful, covetous, gluttons, the lustful, and so it's a hierarchy which is inverted in the order compared to the hierarchy of the sins in Inferno. And finally, the virtual paradise of Dante, of the Divine Comedy, the third of the three sections which compose the poem, constitute the poem. Why virtual paradise? Allora, Dante flies from the mountain of Purgatory, flies up through the 7 heavens of the planets that were known in his time. So you have La Luna, the Moon, Mercury, and then you have Venere, Venus, Il Sole, Sun, which is considered a planet too, revolving naturally around the Earth. And then you have Marte, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. But the difference is really radical compared to Inferno and Purgatorio, because in fact the souls of paradise, the saints of paradise, do not reside in these heavens. They are all together in this empyrean, in this kind of luogo non luogo, as Dante calls it, this place, no place, beyond space and time, when all the souls contemplate God face to face, and they come down, group by group, to meet Dante in these heavens, but they don't reside in those heavens. So the heaven, the way Dante, the topography of a heaven, like Dante, of paradise, like Dante presents it to us, actually does not exist. This is a temporary show that is given to Dante, and the saints, the saved souls, do not live, let's say, do not enjoy their eternal bliss in these physical heavens, but they are beyond space and time in the contemplation, in the direct contemplation of God. And they don't appear to Dante with their recognizable human features, but they are just lights, and which is my last image, which has always posed a difficulty of representation for the many illustrators of the Divine Comedy. The Divine Comedy has enjoyed probably the largest fortune with illustrators of literary works. But in Paradise, you see, this is the famous Doré. In Paradise, even the most refined illustrators had the difficulty of, they didn't know how to represent a place which was so immaterial. So they invented the clouds, invented, these spirits appearing with the human recognizable features. But this is not the way, actually, the narrative of Paradise works. So this is more or less the physical journey of Dante through the Divine Comedy. But I promised, and I think I will do it, in in 15 minutes to escort you through also the journey of the Divine Comedy in terms of a moral and a spiritual experience. What is the moral, spiritual experience of hell or inferno? Naturally, inferno is the experience of evil, is the contact with il male, with evil, with sinners. And the first reaction of Dante, Dante the traveler through this horrible realm of darkness, the first reaction is horror. Also because these people are tortured in the most inventive, sophisticated way. And so Dante recoils in horror in front, for example, of the gluttons who roll themselves in this kind of putrid mud like pigs. Or he's horrified by the transformation of the suicide in vegetables, in trees, but when you touch or you break a branch of the trees, the tree bleeds like a human body. Or, for example, the sores of discord. The sore of discord, those who divided communities, religions, families, are punished being divided themselves physically. They are physically mutilated and butchered by the devils. There is one who goes around decapitated and holding up his head as a lantern. So there is this graphic quality to Inferno, to which Dante naturally reacts in horror. And the horror as naturally is a lesson, and the lesson, you understand, is very simple. Look what happens to those who committed these sins. If you commit these sins, this is what awaits you. But the horror is not just the only reaction. The other reaction, a more complicated reaction, is pity and compassion. Now, I must say that there have been many scholars of specialized in Dante and his work, who have still think that the reaction of pity and compassion of Dante in front of a certain type of sinners is wrong. Dante weeps in front of the lustful. Dante is obviously very deeply touched in front of certain sinners who maintained through their evil doing their humanity. And I don't think this is wrong. I don't think this is, a mistake by Dante. I think this is intrinsic in the experience of evil that Dante wants to share with us and to communicate with. Because if these people were so different from us, so different from Dante, if the evil were such a alien, incomprehensible almost experience, impossible to penetrate, the Divine Comedy would be a Sunday sermon or a versified catechism, but the Divine Comedy is not a versified catechism. These sinners inspire pity and compassion because Dante feels them so similar to himself. They committed their sins, but they kept, even Inferno, their kind of humanity. And the lesson in this case is more insinuating and more sophisticated than the lesson of horror. The lesson is, you see, they are not so different from you. You are not so different from them. So watch out, because it's very difficult. The line between right and wrong is very fine. It would be very easy for you to slip into one of those gironi, one of those punishments. Purgatory, briefly. Purgatory probably is well, everything in Dante is so new and so inventive and so extraordinary. But Purgatory is particularly extraordinary because Dante seems to tell us what is the difference between the souls of Purgatory and the souls of Inferno. Sometimes it's difficult even to teach this difference to students. No, the people in Purgatory who are there being punished but are waiting to fly up to paradise once that they atoned their sins, these people are not better people than the people in hell. There is one character in Purgatory who says, "Orribil furono I peccati miei." My sins were horrible. My sins were horrible. So what makes the difference? The people in Purgatory were not better people than the people in hell, but they repented. That is the difference. They repented. There was a moment in their lives where they looked themselves in the mirror and they said, this is wrong. This is the wrong way. I cannot go ahead like this. I have to change. This moment, this really crucial moment when you realize that you are on the wrong path. That makes the difference. That makes the difference between damnation and salvation. Sometimes it's just a moment when you decide that really you are wrong and you have to change. But this is not enough. And that's why Dante constructed the mountain of Purgatory. Because that moment is decisive, but is not enough. What do you need at that point to reconstruct you, to reconstruct a new identity? You need time. Time. And time is the real invention and the original invention of Purgatory. It's not enough to say, okay, I want to change. Yes, you want to change. Good. But it will take a long process of reflecting, coming to terms with your whole identity, recognizing your weakness. You need, in order to heal completely, you need time and you need patience and you need humility. And time is what comes back to Purgatory, literally, because Dante in hell, I mean in the darkness of hell, doesn't realize the passing of time. But in Purgatory, on the mountain of Purgatory, the sun rises and sets. Dante sleeps even, which he did not in hell. Has dreams. The time is back. The time is back. And the Purgatory is almost as if those people were, accorded such a supplement of earthly life in order to perfect their conversion, their inner intimate change. And let me tell you, I mean, at the summit of Purgatory, of the mountain of Purgatory, there is a magnificent ritual, because all these souls, before flying up to paradise, are immersed in the waters of the river Lethe, which is the river of oblivion. They must forget. Because at a certain point, when you have completed your penitence, you cannot always look back. At the point, looking back will be like basking in a sort of perverse narcissism. Basta, enough. Okay, the past is the past. The past is over. The past is over. You have to forget and to look forward. The joy of paradise. the joy of paradise. Paradise is a very special part of the Divine Comedy, as I tried to tell you already. If I had to extract, let's say, a contemporary meaning, like a message from the theological shell of paradise, I'd say that Dante depicts in his paradise, not so much the joy, the possession of a final ecstatic happiness, but the approximation to that happiness. Paradise is the place imperfect, by definition, in Dante's comedy. It is imperfect because what Dante sees, as I told you, in the topography of the spheres, is an ephemeral show. The souls come down, talk to him, illuminate him about the mysteries of the Christian faith. But then, after these celestial conversations, they fly back to the Empyrean, and the spheres, I mean, those heavens, remain empty. So whereas the landscape and the geography of Inferno and Purgatory pre-existed the passage of Dante, the journey of Dante, and will continue to exist after Dante's passage, no, the paradise is ephemeral, it's just a show, temporary show. And it's imperfect because no matter what Dante saw, which was already an approximation of paradise, was not the real paradise, Dante makes it very clear from the very beginning that he cannot remember properly what he saw, because what he saw under the influx of divine grace, which was temporary. And even the little crumbs, let's say, that he retains in his memory of this experience of paradise, even those little crumbs are too much for his language, for his human language. So what we read in the last section of the Divine Comedy is a shadow of a shadow, is the approximate expression of a defective memory of some sort of approximate paradise. So even at the end of the Divine Comedy, when Dante is introduced through the intercession of the Virgin Mary to the actual mystery of God, even there, we don't grasp the real happiness that was promised to us, let's say, at the end of this journey. Dante says that he was, let's say, admitted, as it were, to the very abyss of God's light. He sinks, he dives into this abyss. He sees the way the cosmos, the universe works. At a certain point, he sees something which is like the optical configuration of the optical representation of the Trinity, of the Catholic Trinity. He sees two rainbows and an arc of fire, and he understands that the two rainbows are the two persons of the Trinity, the Father and the Son, and then the arc of fire is the Holy Spirit. But the second rainbow is a rainbow, and at the same time is a human face, because that is the optic, let's say, rendition of the mystery of incarnation. But non erano da ciò le proprie penne, Dante says at the end. I mean, my wings of a poet were not strong enough. I cannot describe what I saw. I cannot describe what I saw. And so when at the very, very end of the poem, he says that he kind of enters into the rotation of the stars. He enters into l'amor che muove il sole e le altre stelle. He enters into the love who moves the stars, the sun and the other stars. Sure, but at that point, the poem ends, and the real experience of joy, the real experience of God cannot be said. God in a way, and the final happiness of paradise is in the white space beneath those last memorable verses. So, what does it say? What does Dante's Paradise say to us? Well, maybe that happiness is always postponed, is always beyond our expectations, cannot be grasped for sure ever. But also maybe that the journey to get there was fully worth it. Okay, that's all.